Sorry Now. Paul Turner Mystery, Book 1. Author Mark Richard Zubro. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1991. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 5. 5 minutes after roll call ended, that morning Carruthers rushed into the squad room and ran over to Turner and Fenwick. "Lieutenant wants to see you," he said. "Are you guys in trouble?" Turner said. "We'll have to see," Carruthers said. "I watched all the newscasts last night. They all had a story about the murder. Snotty reporters asking stupid questions. I heard there's pressure from the mayor's office to get this solved quickly. Do you think it's part of a gay conspiracy, like the Reverend said in his press conference?" Fenwick gave him a sour look and marched to the coffee pot. He growled, "You watch too much TV news, and since when did you and the mayor become good buddies?" In general, Turner didn't mind reporters. He suspected this was Ian's influence. Carruthers tended to exaggerate most everything anyway. Minutes later, the two men walked into the lieutenant's office. They sat on two red vinyl-covered straight-back chairs from years of familiarity. They ignored the stuffing protruding from the cracks in the seat covers. The lieutenant's desk and two large folding tables against the side walls nearly filled the room. The table on the left side contained neat stacks of files and forms. The table on the right had a recent hurricane look because of the papers heaped on it. The lieutenant's desk had a phone, a picture of his family, several open folders, a pen set, and the lieutenant's elbows. He cupped his hands around his chin. "Hell of a day," was his first comment. Outside, a placid blue sky hid the fact that the weatherman had issued severe storm warnings until 6 that evening, with tornado watches and warnings possible. The only evidence now was a rising wind gusting to 40 miles an hour. The lieutenant picked a pen up and tapped it on the desktop. "What have you got on the Mucklewrath investigation?" "Nothing," Fenwick said. Turner filled the lieutenant in on what they had done and found out. "Nothing," Fenwick said at the end. The lieutenant scrunched his eyebrows together and pursed his lips. "What are you planning to do today?" "Check any other lab reports, try to get a lead on other preachers, and I want to talk to Wilson and Roosevelt about Wilmer's death." "The old guy died?" the lieutenant said. "Yes. They found him in the river on Saturday afternoon. He claimed he knew who killed the little girl," Turner said. "Did he?" the lieutenant said. "Did he ever know anything?" said Fenwick. "I'm surprised he hadn't gotten around to confessing to this one." Wilmer did have a habit of confessing to some of their more difficult cases. How he learned about them, no one was sure. He hung around the station so much, Turner thought maybe he found out by osmosis. "We haven't got much else," Turner said. "I think it's worth checking." The lieutenant nodded. "Do it, although I'm afraid it won't lead to anything. Check the preachers, go back over some of the same ground. The Reverend has been making quite a stink in his speeches. The press hasn't gone totally nuts with this thing, because a lot of them don't like these preachers. We've been lucky so far." "Do we have a political or press pressure problem?" Fenwick asked. "I'll bet you can't say that again without screwing it up," Turner said. The lieutenant said, "We'll worry about the press and politicians if we have to. For now, no." At the door, Turner turned back and said, "I got a call last night. Somebody threatened my kids." They mentioned the murder. "You got a tap on the phone set up?" "It's the first thing I'm going to do," Turner said. The voice wasn't familiar. "It might be nothing, but it's too suspicious and coincidental. I also called the 12th District. They'll put a special watch on, but they can't spare a 24-hour guard. I warned the boys. Jeff gets help from my front door to school, and Brian promised to be extra careful. I told Mrs. Tolucci this morning she watches the kids after school. The whole neighborhood will be alerted before noon today. That'll help." Fenwick asked him about the call as they sat down at their desks. He'd been to Turner's home numerous times, and the families got together at least twice a year, at Christmas and for a summer picnic every July. "These people have to be fucking nuts," Fenwick concluded. After a brief discussion, Turner made the calls to set up the phone tap. They decided to phone the police departments on the basis of Dooley's information from the day before. She had given them basic data on prominent televangelists, not only in California, but around the country as well. During the calls, they got some sympathy because people recognized desperation tactics. When they saw them, many of them had been in the same position. Sympathy, but little help. No one knew of any feuds or major proportions. One cop in Atlanta told Turner, "And these guys are always squabbling about one thing or another. No one notices anymore." After an hour and a half of futility, they reached the end of their list. "I'm open to any suggestions you've got before we try Wilmer," Turner said to Fenwick. Buck got himself another cup of coffee and grumbled an okay. They walked over to Roosevelt and Wilson. Turner explained to the two detectives what they wanted and why. Roosevelt and Wilson were happy to oblige. A passerby saw something in the water and called the police. We got the call at Wilson checked some papers. At 4:16 yesterday afternoon. They fished the body out from under the Holstead Street Bridge. We assumed he got drunk and fell in. "I wonder," Turner said. "I never knew Wilmer to be falling down drunk at that time of the day. That doesn't seem right." "Could be any number of reasons," Wilson said. "Maybe he got in a fight with a buddy over a bottle, or he took a wrong step and that was it." "Maybe he was pushed," Turner said. "We'll get the autopsy report later today," Wilson said. "The area canvassed yet?" Turner asked. "Everybody who was around on Saturday was talked to. No one saw anything. We weren't planning to go back today. We didn't think it was important," Roosevelt said. "It probably isn't," Turner said. "You don't mind if we go ask around?" They didn't. They had plenty of other cases to work on. On the Holstead Street Bridge, Turner glanced at the green Chicago River below. From here, it stretched a couple of 100 yards east, then curved north. Turner said to Fenwick, "Maybe he didn't fall off this bridge. Maybe he floated downstream. If we each took a side of the river and walked toward the loop, we could talk to people and see if anybody knew anything." Fenwick said, "Might as well give it a shot." On his way to a rundown 3-story fake tile brick building, Turner walked under the shadow of the Dan Ryan Expressway. He glanced up at the concrete, saw the massive traffic tie-up typical for Chicago expressways during summer patching and reconstruction. He talked to mechanics at marinas and security guards at nearly abandoned warehouses, got snapped at by mean-looking German shepherds behind chain-link fences, and discovered nothing. He built up an itchy sweat in the close quarters of the old buildings, most of them un-air-conditioned and steaming. After an hour of plodding and even getting lost once under the girders of the Dan Ryan Expressway, he came up with nothing. Wearily, he trudged back to where they had left the car on Halstead Street. Fenwick wasn't in sight. Turner leaned on the railings, staring down at the water. The flashing lights of an emergency tow truck caught his eye. From the expressway he'd passed under several times, he watched the truck as it weaved through the snarled traffic. The weaving yellow lights halted for a few minutes, and then he saw the front half of a car begin to rise. Moments later, they left. Turner kept his gaze fixed on the workers. They repaired expressways in Chicago all summer long, it seemed. To avoid tying up rush hour traffic, they especially concentrated on doing the work during midday, late in the evenings, mornings, or on the weekends. And they might have seen something if they were there last Saturday. Fenwick trudged up a few minutes later in the car. Turner explained his idea. They entered the expressway at Roosevelt Road and immediately found themselves in the traffic jam caused by the construction. It took 20 minutes to traverse the half-mile to the workers. They pulled onto the far side of the barricades and got out of the car. First, Turner took a long look around. He'd never walked on an expressway before, and this portion of the Dan Ryan was elevated, so nothing blocked his view to the northeast of the buildings of the loop. Due east, he saw railroad yards. To the west, he could see the houses of the Pilsen neighborhood, just south of his own. Directly north and south, snarled traffic fought its way through the midday construction. They talked to the manager of the work crew. The same guys who had worked Saturday afternoon, making overtime, were at work now. The manager took them to each man in turn. Most, like the manager, wore heavy work boots with thick socks, jeans, t-shirts, and hard hats. A few of the younger men wore cut-offs and no top. Deeply bronzed parts of exposed flesh glinted in the sunlight. They strolled around freshly poured squares of cement and mounds of jagged pieces of rock, past one spot where the concrete had yet to be poured. Turner could see the exposed cables and girders. Once he thought he caught a glimpse of street far below. They talked to clumps of men. No one had heard or seen a thing. The manager felt it necessary to apologize after they talked to the last group. "Is that everybody who was here?" Fenwick asked the manager in front of the last group. "I think so," the manager said. His name was Arnold Flickstein. Muscles like cannonballs bulged along his arms and shoulders. A gray-haired man in his 60s said, "Billy's in the John. He was here." The tiny group looked toward the portable John. The door opened and a slender, bronze-shouldered blond man in his late teens or early 20s stepped out. He noted the gaze of the crowd and strode over. Portions of his white jockey shorts peeked out at the belt and crotch of skimpy cutoffs. Without a shirt, he presented a well-tanned, hairless chest for admiration. He smiled easily at the cops and spoke in a soft voice when he said, "Hello." Fenwick asked him if he'd seen anything on Saturday. "Well, I think maybe I did. I drink so much water that I can't sweat it all away. I'm always going to the John to piss." He scratched his left ear, then said, "I don't know, though." Turner and Fenwick took the man aside. He told them his name was Spike Bergenson. On Saturday, he'd gone to the John. As he said, he'd had to wait a minute for somebody already inside. Bergenson said, "I looked over on the south bank there and saw 3 guys. I guess I wouldn't have noticed them except they wore kind of dark, heavy clothes. Didn't fit the weather. They looked out of place, suspicious." "What did they do?" Turner asked. "Nothing much. They kind of watched the water for a while, then drifted off past the boats. I couldn't have seen them for sure more than half a minute." "Did they look in a hurry or scared? Did they stare around them?" Turner asked. "Not really. They just looked like guys hanging around." "You didn't see where they went?" Fenwick asked. "Nah. The guy came out of the John, so I went in. It pays to hurry around here. Old Arnold don't like it when he thinks you're loafing." "Did you see anything in the water?" Turner asked. "Like what?" "Anything. A couple of little boats, nothing unusual. What should I have seen?" Maybe a dead body," Fenwick said. The kid gulped and said, "Oh." Turner and Fenwick walked to the portable John and peered over the edge, where the kid must have looked on Saturday. He wouldn't necessarily have seen anything in the water from this side. It was a little surprising he'd even noted the men. "It was the same guys," Fenwick said. Turner agreed, then added, "And they've got to be amateurs. I want to check out gangs and narcotics when we get back, just in case. I'd bet these 3 are acting on their own. Nobody who's a pro threatens a cop or his family. Too much unnecessary heat. Unless you busted somebody recently. Who's big in the gangs?" Fenwick said. "We've busted the same guys for the past 2 months, and we've worked on the other cases together, even if we arrested them on our own. Nobody anywhere mentioned connections. We usually get a call from somebody at either gangs or narcotics, if we have something more than we know." "Okay, we're clean the last few months," Fenwick said. "It doesn't mean it couldn't be somebody from the past. Remember that woman who said she'd get you for arresting her for beating her husband?" "Tell me you really believe she's behind all this," Turner said. "I'm just suggesting is all," Fenwick said. Let's get back, so we can do some checking." Back at the station, he had a message from Ian to call. He tried the Gay Tribune office, but Ian was out, while Fenwick called a friend who worked with gangs. Turner called organized crime. They had no hints for him about anybody angry enough to threaten cops. Fenwick reported on the talk he had with the gang crime unit. "Nothing. Nobody's noticed any unusual activity of any kind. The guy I talked to said he'd put out a couple of feelers, and he'd do some checking with our guys who have mob connections." Turner called narcotics. After he hung up from them, he told Fenwick. "Same thing. No unusual activity." And he'd put out the word. Same as organized crime. Charlie Grimwald, the old officer on the desk downstairs who occasionally drove a squadron on busy nights, came upstairs with their lunches. He'd caught them on their way in to ask if they wanted anything. Turner had ordered Italian beef with hot peppers from Angel's coffee wagon. Charlie Grimwald delivered Turner's sandwich, collected his money, and then leaned down close. Turner got an up-front view of the white hairs sprouting from the old man's nostrils. Charlie put his hand on Turner's shoulder and whispered, If anything happens to your kids, that guy is dead meat. You know we'll be watching in case somebody tries, but people are crazy. He squeezed Turner's shoulder tightly and repeated, if anything happens, the killer dies. It may only be vengeance, but it will be something. Turner watched the old man's eyes. He saw drops near the corners. Charlie suddenly straightened up, snuffled loudly, rubbed his hand vigorously over his nose, and shuffled away. Turner knew word of the threat had spread among his colleagues. He knew the sincerity of promises made by men like Charlie Grimwald. At the annual station picnic every summer in Lincoln Park, he'd seen Charlie push Jeff's wheelchair to various zoo exhibits and pick him up to bring him closer to the animals. Jeff didn't trust a lot of people to carry him, but the beefy old cop was one of his favorites. For the moment, though, Turner wanted to concentrate on preventing an attack on his kids. Turner started his lunch. Halfway through his sandwich, Ian called. "Did you call the good doctor?" was Ian's first question. "I've been a little busy," Turner told him. "Get a break in the Mucklewrath case?" Ian asked quickly. "Nope." "What did you call about?" Ian ignored his question and said, "I hear the good doctor is going to be at a party tonight. You should go. You should call him. Don't wait for him to call you." Turner sighed, then said, "Ian, we're busy. Do you have something for me besides gossip?" "I promise you'll go to the party tonight, and I'll tell." "I'll try to make it. Now what?" "I assume that's the best promise I'll get out of you, and what I've got is another homophobic bastard getting in." Turner said, "I've tracked down the other two incidents you've given me. There is absolutely no connection I can find between them. I can't find a glimmer of a hint that either of those is connected to the murder. Start with major problem one. There is no way the killers could have known that Mucklewrath and his daughter would be on that beach at that time." Ian started to speak. Turner interrupted. "Think about it. They couldn't have. They had to be waiting for the opportunity. They needed him there with his daughter. Arson and mass diarrhea are well planned, well thought out, but they are not the usual crimes we connect with someone who goes on to be a killer. It just doesn't work." "Do you want to listen or not?" Ian asked. "Okay," Turner gave a resigned sigh. "You know Jay Kendall, the columnist?" Turner grunted a yes. Jay Kendall wrote a syndicated column based in Chicago. A couple of years ago, he had achieved the coup of a lifetime when both the Sun-Times and the Tribune started carrying his column. "You know he owns all those racehorses in Kentucky?" Turner tapped a pencil in his desk. "Somebody cut off a horse's head and put it in his bed, so he'd see it when he woke up. I saw The Godfather twice, Ian. So he crossed somebody in the gambling world or the mob." Ian resumed as if he hadn't been interrupted. "He attacks gays in his column in a mean-spirited, vicious way. He held a news conference this afternoon. He's prided himself all these years on always telling his readers the truth. Remember the series he did on legislators in Springfield and their amorous involvements while in our beloved state capital? Yeah, he refused to name names for some reason. Supposedly his source took him to an expensive bordello. Some madame gave him hot inside information. You got it. Only he claimed he was saving the names for the next election. So, it was all set up, all fake." "Huh?" "You heard me. He called the news conference to apologize. He's furious. He's determined to find out who set him up." "Any idea who did it?" Turner asked. "I've got my suspicions. The international gay conspiracy. Even if it was, as far as I can tell, whoever set him up didn't do anything illegal. If they actually gave him names, that could be some problem. I suppose. I just think it's funny somebody finally made a fool of him after he's done that all these years to other people. He had lots of people who hated him. Yeah, half the cops in the state for a start. He opposed giving cops raises unless the crime rate went down. The guy has criticized almost everybody, from the governor on down to homeless bums on the street. Not that the governor couldn't use getting his butt chewed out once in a while, but you know what I mean." "How did he find out it was a setup?" "They sent him a note explaining the whole operation. They didn't sign it, but they did end it. Sorry now, aren't you?" Off the phone, Turner filled Fenwick in. "What I don't get is the sorry now shit. Okay, if it's revenge, but why not say who you are so the victim knows why they're suffering? Turner shook his head. They've got to be coincidences, but more important, these other things aren't murders. Fenwick thought a minute. If any more happen, we can follow them up, but I wouldn't put much stock in them. Turner called the medical examiner's office. They put him through to the ME in charge of Wilmer's autopsy. He talked to Gerald Miller numerous times, but they'd never met. Miller's high, tiny voice led Turner to picture a grossly overweight man in his late 50s, pale and effeminate. In actuality, Miller was 5'3" and 28 years old and weighed 130 pounds. Turner asked about Wilmer's autopsy. They hadn't gotten to it yet. Miller asked, "He's more than just a bum off the street." "Maybe I'm not sure when you do the autopsy. Could you check for anything suspicious?" "Come on, Paul. I can check for years for suspicious stuff. We always check for something suspicious. How long you been doing this? I need something a little more specific." Feeling slightly stupid, Turner thought a minute. "Start with blows to the head. If he hit his head as he fell, I guess it wouldn't prove anything, but check it out. Then maybe any kind of poisons. And, oh yeah, as many blood tests as you can." "You got it," Miller said and hung up. Turner sipped some coffee. Saw the commander striding across the office area. The Chicago Police Department was probably unique in having the office of commander. It came about because of a scandal in the police department in the 1960s. The new police commissioner wanted reform, but the entrenched captains, then the rulers of the police districts, were nearly untouchable. At the time, the police district's boundaries matched those of the political wards. Politicians and cops, it was suspected but rarely proved, lived in a snugly symbiotic relationship, unreceptive to alterations in their all too often lucrative practices. The new commissioner simply put a new person in command of the district and placed the formerly autonomous captains in sets of 2, 3, or 4 in redrawn districts. Now they had someone to report to who was directly connected to the commissioner's office instead of a politician. The commander, a tall black man, sat on the corner of Fenwick's desk nearest the coffee machine. Turner liked the guy. He spent a lot of his time boosting the egos of men and women who usually met only the dregs of society at their worst. Cops face burnout, discouragement at the monumentality of their task, and awareness of the inherent futility of their jobs. They can't eradicate crime and stupidity, but spend 8 hours every day trying to do just that. The commander worked as many hours as the detectives, kept out of their way, and respected their professionalism. In his soft, raspy voice, he asked about their progress in the Mucklewrath case. Turner explained what they'd done and what their conclusions were so far. The commander nodded carefully at the end and said, "You're doing fine, but we've got all this bullshit from the press, politicians, and preachers. I'll hold them off for as long as I can." He wished them luck and strode out. "We do have a motive, though," Turner said. "Whoever it is wanted Mucklewrath to be sorry that his daughter is dead. Who would want him to suffer that much?" Fenwick asked, "Who has he hurt who would think the murder of his daughter is equal to the suffering they've had?" They shrugged their shoulders. Neither had an answer to the other's question. They spent much of the afternoon checking the reports on the callbacks the beat cops had made it to people not home on their first canvass. Turner and Fenwick followed up on a few of them who still hadn't been home. They came up with a total of nothing. They spent the later part of the afternoon and the early evening filling in forms. By 8, they looked at hours more work. Turner, jacket off, tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned, and 3 cans of diet soda empty on his desk, stood and stretched. "I can't believe this shit," he opined unhappily. The light on his phone for the internal extension blinked. He eased it out of its cradle and rested it on his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. "Somebody to see you, Paul," said the desk sergeant from downstairs. "This person got a name?" Turner rubbed his eyes with his left hand. Silence a moment. "A press guy? Want me to get rid of him? Says his name is Ian something." "I'll see him." But at the moment, Turner didn't want to go to a party. Ian had visited the squad room a few times before. He nodded to Fenwick. Turner said, "I don't have time for a party tonight. I have news, but..." "Yes, you do." Turner plunked himself onto a swivel chair and put his feet up on the desk. Ian sat in the suspect chair. Fenwick placed his elbows on his desk and leaned closer. Ian addressed the two men. "We got another one." Turner sat up a little straighter. Ian held up a picture. The two cops squinted at the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Turner said, "It's some naked guy in bed with a woman. This is news?" "Not a very good picture," Fenwick said. "It'll never sell as pornography. She's too ugly, and he's too old." "You don't know who he is?" Ian demanded. The cops stared harder at the picture, then looked up at Ian and shook their heads. Turner said, "I bet you're going to tell us, aren't you?" "Every paper in town got this a little over an hour ago, along with an anonymous note. This is Ted Samant, auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Chicago. It doesn't say who she is. Besides rebuking the bishop for his transgression against humanity, it ends with the words, 'Sorry now, aren't you?' No one at the Chancery office, or including the bishop, has been available for comment." Turner said, "Who would do this?" Ian said, "Everybody. The guy led the campaign to close down abortion clinics. He made himself a general pain in the ass to every liberal cause. He got in trouble with the Pope because of his push to have the Catholic Mass done in Latin again." "This doesn't help," Fenwick said. "If it's a conspiracy," Ian began. "Which I don't buy," Turner said. Ian went on imperturbably. "If it's a conspiracy, these people have ways of finding out and operating on a fairly sophisticated level. They could do murder." Turner read the note attached to the picture. "It says this is what he gets for hurting the innocent. I'd like to know a little more about this." "Good luck getting through the church stone wall. Anybody going to print the pictures or story?" "I doubt it," Ian said. "It's embarrassing and amusing, but it arrived anonymously. Even we at the Gay Tribune have journalistic standards. We aren't some sensationalist tabloid." Turner said, "I'll try and talk to the columnist Jake Kendall and to this bishop tomorrow. I still don't buy this conspiracy crap." "Double fuck," Fenwick said. "Let's go home and start fresh in the morning." Outside, Turner and Hume leaned against Paul's car. Ian said, "I finally got to hear the famous Fenwick say double fuck. I think that in itself makes this trip worthwhile." Turner opened his car door. Hume said, "This bishop gave anti-gay speeches all over the country." Turner said, "I promised I'd look into it." "You have to come to the party." "Are you nuts? I've got to work tomorrow. The paper on this case stretches from here to Peoria. Give it a rest." The good Dr. George Manfred will be there." Turner stopped himself, getting in the car. "That's dirty pull." "I know he'd love to see you." "Who says?" "I just know. I've got to get home to my kids. I took the liberty of renewing my acquaintance with Mrs. Tolucci before I stopped over. She has the situation well in hand. She said for you to go and have a good time." Ian, the tall, vaguely aristocratic wasp, and the relentlessly ethnic Mrs. Tolucci had gotten on famously from the first time they'd met. "I'm going to check on the boys," Turner said. "I took a cab over knowing you'd be reasonable, so you can drive." "I'm not staying late, and if you don't have a ride, you can walk home." "Agreed." Paul found Brian at Mrs. Tolucci's kitchen table, studying for his advanced physics final exam. His son glanced up long enough to greet his dad and say, "Hi, Ian," before quickly returning to his papers. They discovered Jeff and a friend playing Nintendo in Mrs. Tolucci's living room. She'd bought the set for Jeff 2 years ago. Paul watched for a few minutes as his son zapped various animated bad guys. At a break in the action, he gave him a hug. Mrs. Tolucci came down from upstairs to tell him to go and have a good time. Jill Garrett, a friend of Ian's, threw a party once a year for his own birthday. He lived in the top floor apartment of a 3-story brick building on Belmont Avenue, a block west of Broadway. Tonight, balloons crammed the apartment from front door to back. Turner noticed that most of the balloons contained words or phrases that had nothing to do with birthdays. And Gil might have gone to a party caterers and purchased 10 of every kind they had. Turner had met Garrett several times before and liked him after hellos. Ian remarked, I love the balloons, but some of them don't seem to match the occasion. Garrett, a tall, broad-shouldered man who worked in a steel mill, said, I know. I thought it would be a kick to buy all of them, so I did. Don't you love it? Garrett's lover, one Neil Orkovsky, whirled up with a tray of drinks in his hand and said, It looks like shit, but it's better than last year. Ian explained to Turner as they grabbed drinks and moved to a corner of the front room near the front door and next to a grand piano. Last year's party, he decided on a jungle motif with real plants and real rain. It took 3 days to clean the mess. I don't see the good doctor, Turner said. He'll be here. He'll promise me. You told him. Paul, we're all interested in the cause of true love. Turner guessed at least 40 people must have been crowded into the apartment. Many greeted Ian with profuse enthusiasm. Ian introduced them to Paul, who caught most of their names. More than a few cast appreciative glances over the cop's body. He'd worn faded jeans and a black t-shirt with his 5 o'clock shadow. He could have been a model for one of the more rugged men's colognes. Turner sipped Budweiser from a can and wished he hadn't come. 10 minutes later, he crushed his tin beer can, dropped it in a trash basket next to the piano, and prepared to leave. At the moment, Ian's audience consisted of 2 extremely young and incredibly attractive men. He remembered their names as Rusty and Ernie. Briefly, Turner wondered if they were over the age of jailbait, but discovered a second or two later that he didn't care. He waited for a pause in their conversation to say goodnight to Ian. The 2 men Ian was talking to had dark, short-cropped hair, wore tight jeans and gym shoes with no socks, and carried their shirts stuffed into the back pocket of their jeans. Rusty's vaguely red hair accounted for the imaginative nickname his classmates must have stuck him with in 2nd grade. He sported a bruise above his left eye and spoke in a whine. So the trick smacked me right in the bar. I told him if he wanted that kind of action, he'd have to pay more. The asshole didn't want to pay. I knew I shouldn't have started up with a drunk. Then that bull of a bartender, you know, the one with the droopy mustache and the mirrored earrings, down at the womb. Paul didn't know or care. The young man's voice rose several octaves. The stupid shit called the cops. He didn't even tell us. It's not as if we haven't thrown some business his way. Well, the cops showed up, and they were just brutal. They demanded to know what we were up to. We told them we were there for a drink. The other spoke up. They couldn't prove anything. They were just being mean. They shoved us outside and made us put our hands against the car and everything. The first said, I wouldn't have minded being patted down, but they were 2 of the ugliest straight males I have ever seen. Fat asses. From sitting in cop cars and devouring donuts. Why couldn't they leave us alone? At the end of the question, Turner surprised himself by saying, Maybe they didn't leave you alone because you were doing something illegal. If you hadn't been selling yourself, there wouldn't have been a problem. Well, who's Mr. High and Mighty? Rusty said. Ian began. Paul, Ernie interrupted. He's a cop. I can always spot them. I thought so when I walked in, but I can't resist a sexy ass and tight jeans. That almost got me busted 2 months ago. Abruptly, his tone changed. What are you doing at this party? Rusty turned on Paul and asked, You're a closet case. Come to check the opposition. Ian, how could you bring someone like this to Gil's party? He's a friend. And there's no need to mouth off, Rusty, Ian said. Ernie jumped in. All cops are homophobic bastards. He spoke loud enough that they began to draw a crowd. One thing cops tried to be careful about was who they socialized with because of just such situations. At too many parties, somebody with a grudge against a cop took the opportunity to complain about the transgressions of those who gave them tickets or didn't respond quickly enough, or who had been brutal to a friend, or who had harassed the particular minority they might be a member of. Cops were so careful about being seen off duty that they told rookies at the police academy never to drive to work in their uniforms. If you did, you were an open invitation to any nut angry at any cop who might take it out on you. Rusty planted himself in front of Turner and jammed his finger into the cop's chest. Ian tried to insert his body between them, but the muscular little whore shoved him out of the way, knocking off Ian's slouch fedora in the process. Turner didn't want to hurt the guy, wanted no trouble at all. He cursed Ian inwardly. Rusty began shouting, emphasizing the loudest words with continued jabs at Turner's chest. At just that moment, the door swung open and a commanding voice said, "What the hell is this?" George Manfred strode into the room. Paul noticed that Rusty immediately stopped and looked sheepish. He remembered Ian's comment Saturday night about Manfred's reputation and ability to calm situations instantly. George gave Paul a friendly smile, then turned a withering stare on Rusty. "You're drunk. Go home." "Where's Gil?" Their host emerged from the back of the crowd. "I was in the John. What's happening?" "Hi, George. Glad you could make it," George said. "Rusty and Ernie need to be somewhere else in this universe." To Paul's surprise, the two hustlers complied quickly and meekly. Minutes later, a new beer in hand, Paul, Ian, and George talked quietly in a corner. "How did you do that?" Turner asked. "They know me," the doctor said simply. "George can't tell you, but I can," Ian said. 6 months ago, Rusty had a bad scare about AIDS. He thought he had one of the opportunistic infections. Turned out to be an ordinary cause of pneumonia. "Not," Paul began. "No. Although I doubt if it's through any fault of his own that it wasn't," Ian said. He lavished a lot of gratitude on George when he found out it wasn't AIDS. Trumpeted his virtues around the gay community for months. Ian frowned. "Strange thing is, Rusty's very bright. He got a Rhodes Scholarship, but turned it down. Being sexy gave him a huge income with less work. I guess. Forget him. It's good to see you, George." Minutes later, Ian left them, and Manfred and Turner found a seat on a bench in a window bay. They sat letting their bodies touch at the shoulders, hips, and thighs. Paul enjoyed the closeness and warmth. By midnight, they promised to get together the next day, if their schedules permitted. They lingered arms holding each other tightly, sharing their first kiss on the landing just outside the apartment. Ian teased Paul about the goodbye as Paul drove him home. Turner asked, "How did he control those two so well?" "I'm a cop and supposed to be able to do it that quick." "I just wanted to avoid a scene," Ian said. "I told you, George Manfred is one of the most respected people in the gay community. Everybody, or at least everybody at Gil's party, knows of him. He's been with them when their friends have been dying. He's the most gentle and kind man. He'll spend huge amounts of time with grieving significant others. It's why he has no time. He needs to meet somebody just like you." Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.